Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is where you're joining us from. Please do say hello and let us know where you're joining from. We will be able to see your comments in the chat in the studio here. So I'm Annette Richmond. This is the Smarter Career Moves LinkedIn Live show. And I'm so excited to have you here today, Brenden. I actually met you kind of through a mutual friend, Tina. And I did take, you have a free communications program that you do. It's just kind of like an intro to your, longer program. And I learned, several things there, and I'm just so excited to have you here with me today. So can you please just tell people a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely, Annette. It's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me. So yeah, my journey started when I was in college. I went to business school and I did these things called case competitions. Think of it like professional sports, but for nerds. So while the guy, right. So while the guys my age were playing rugby or basketball, I was doing presentations competitively in that. That's how I learned how to communicate. But then as
Okay.
I got older, I started coaching a lot of the students in business school so they would win competitions. That's how I accidentally got really good at communication coaching. So then I started a YouTube channel called MasterTalk because
Mhm.
I felt that everything I was sharing wasn't available for free. And then a few years later, turned to a coaching business. And here we are today.
Yeah, I've been on your YouTube channel. It's well worth a visit. We'll have to put a link to it in the comments after the show. A lot of great information there. So, you know, um, being able to communicate effectively is so essential, whether you're in corporate or you're have your own business or whatever. And I think most people, when they think of becoming a better communicator, they think of writing. They think of writing more effectively, clearly, concisely. And I think communication, as far as verbal communication, people think of it like a sense of humor. People think, oh, I have a good sense of humor. People think they're good communicators. I mean, I have a lot of people that tell me they think they're good communicators. And so since you help people become top communicators, what do you think is the biggest misconception about communication or effective communication?
Right. So the way that I think about this, Annette, is there's actually a structured approach in how you actually get better with this over time. And I
Okay.
would argue almost everybody doesn't follow that structure. So here's the analogy I would think about it. It's like juggling 18 balls at the same time. So one ball is eye contact, one of it's body language, another one's storytelling, smiling, and you're doing all of that at the same time. And that's where the challenge lies. And it gets really confusing. So for
Hmm.
me, it's about saying, what are the three easiest balls that we can start juggling right away? And let's start with the first one, which is the random word exercise. Pick a random word like tissue box, a computer screen, like cup, and create random presentations out of thin air. And that's how we start our road to mastering uncertainty and making sense out of nonsense.
Wow. So I love that idea, and I think you're right. There is no framework to or rhyme or reason to, we learn to speak when we're kids, and people think, well, I've done it all my life, I know how to do it. And I like that random word. Tina had mentioned that to me. And so my question is about sort of practicing. That sounds like it's practicing communication skills by doing exercises like that. Do you have any other tips for that we could do on our own?
Absolutely, Annette. It's like going to the gym, right? Fitness. Sure, we could go to our personal trainers and say, "Yeah, I need to know the diet plan, the calorie intake, and the exercise schedule." And then the trainer just looks at you and goes, "Do you walk 15 minutes a day?" And they go, "No. Why? Why is that important? I don't need to walk 15 minutes a day." So the same analogy applies with communication in it. So I would encourage everyone listening to this episode right now. Are we booking 5-10 minutes in our schedule every day to just do the random word exercise a few times, even if it all sucks? Like you just take tissue box and you go, okay, how would I create a presentation out of that? And if we do that consistently, we'll be better than most people in our industry. So that's one. The second exercise, the second ball, is called the question drill in it. So we get asked questions all the time in our lives, at work, at school, on a podcast, but a lot of us are reactive to those questions, not proactive. I'll give you an example. A
Okay.
Right. So a few years ago, when I was starting to guest on podcasts, I sucked. Like, it was terrible. I remember some guy asked me, he said, "Where does the fear of communication come from?" And I looked at him and I said, Los Angeles, San Diego. So I wasn't sure what the answer was, so I just invented something. So what's the exercise? Every day for 5 minutes, write down the answer to one question you think the world will ask you about your expertise. And if you do that once a day for a year, you'll have answered 365 questions.
Wow, I love that. I love that. It's such a great way. And whether you're also whether you're in corporate or a business and you want to talk to potential employers, potential clients, I'm sure things like that could really be helpful in that. So I love that. And I also am curious about speaking. Now, one of the things that I'm sure you've heard this, we've all heard this, that the people are afraid to speak. When they think about being at a funeral, they'd rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy. And I read a stat recently that, according to the National Institutes of Mental Health, 75% people rank speaking as their number one fear. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about that. And I'm also curious if you see a tie-in, which I'm thinking I do, to the idea of people doing video. There are so many people that are afraid to get on camera. And so if I know that's a big kind of multiple part question, but if you can talk a little bit about that, I'd appreciate it.
For sure, Nat. So let's start with the first piece, which is why do we have the fear of communication to begin with? This is a challenge that most people in my industry don't tackle, so let's tackle it. It
Okay.
actually makes a lot of sense if you think about it. Where do we learn how to speak? For almost everybody listening to this episode right now, Annette, the answer is one and the same, which is the education system. That's where we learn how to speak in a formal way through
Mhm.
presentations, high school, elementary school. But all of those presentations, Annette, have three fundamental problems. Number one, all of them are mandatory. We don't wake up one morning and say, "Hey, Annette, you want to get breakfast and present all day?" Right? Nobody says that. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is you're never presenting something you're passionate about. "Hey, Annette, what do you want to talk about today? Do you want to talk about dogs, careers, LinkedIn?" No, you got to talk about Shakespeare and poetry. Then after you're done that, you have to talk about the history of Missouri. And you're like, "I don't live in Missouri." So that's problem number two. And then problem number three, which is worst of all in it, every presentation, I don't know why they do it this way. Every presentation is tied to a bloody punishment. If you don't do a great job, you get hit in the head. You lose 20% of your grade. So we grow up believing that communication is a chore, so it becomes one, and nobody wants to get better at doing the dishes.
It's so interesting though, because I get contacted because this LinkedIn live show, it feeds into my podcast of the same name. And I have PR people contacting me all the time, pitching their clients to be on my podcast. And when I tell them, well, we do a LinkedIn live show first, and then that goes into the podcast, I never hear from them again. Why do
Why
you
is
think that?
that?
I don't know. I'm guessing they don't want to be live on video. And, I think that sort of ties into the whole, not being good presenters, being afraid of speaking and presenting is, and I've had other people tell me this, that they're really nervous to be live anywhere.
Right. Here's the way that I would start the conversation. And so now we understand where the fundamental problem is, which is the fear of communication is normal. Like all of us grew up in an education system that basically taught us that it was a chore, so it became one. That's the point. Because if we go to a 5-year-old right now and you ask them to do the random word exercise, they don't sit there and they go, "Will people judge me? What will people think of me?" They just go, "Oh, bacon? Yeah, bacon is something I have for breakfast." They'll just do it, right? And we lose that along the way. So it's definitely has nothing to do with us as human beings, in my opinion.
Hmm.
It's really what we learn as lessons. So now what's the solution? The solution is a couple of things. One is to start seeing communication as a tool for impact. So you talked about video messages, which is actually ball number 3, so it plays nicely. So I'm never going to ask somebody to post on social media. I never start there. I always start with make a list of the 5 people you love the most in your life. People who are open minded, people who are amazing, people who really support you, and ask yourself a simple question. When was the last time we sent any of those people a 20-second video message just saying, "Hey, I really appreciate having you in my life." And that's where the conversation starts. Because when we do that, what we'll realize really quickly is they'll respond to us and go, "Oh my God, I've never received a video message before." And we realize really quickly that even if we're terrible at communication, we can create impact in the world. That's what motivates us to get better.
Well, I often when I first started doing presentations in person decades ago, I was really nervous, and I heard a speech coach, someone like you, give a presentation, and one thing that she said has always stayed with me, and it's that people, they're not looking at you, judging you, they're not caring how you look. I mean, physically how you look, or particularly the tone of, the sound of your voice. I mean, I don't like to see me on video. I'd hate to hear my voice, but they're really concerned with your message. And so it seems like part of what you teach people is to craft a good message, as well as the whole physical part of the eye contact and everything.
Absolutely. But the way that I think about it, Annette, it's kind of like a domino. We have a list of dominoes, and when one of those dominoes fall, all of the others follow. So, for example, let's say somebody listening to this podcast, which is probably 1% of people, but if you're in that 1%, I say congratulations. If you're booking 15 minutes in your calendar to do all 3 exercises every day, you'll be a master communicator in no time. Because there's not a lot of people who are accountants who have done the random word exercise 300 times, just total. There are not a lot of people who have done the question drill more than 50 times. Not a lot of people who send video messages to their clients. But if you do all 3 consistently, you'll build momentum with your communication really, really quickly. And then you can get into how to curate a talk and how to structure presentations.
And the more you do it, the easier it is, right?
No doubt.
And it's funny you talk about video messaging. I have just recently started doing that, although I'm not uncomfortable. I just haven't been doing it. But I remember the 2 or 3 people who have sent me video messages over the years. They stand out because it is so unusual. So, this is a little bit kind of off topic, but profile videos, I think, are such an important way for people to be able to stand out on LinkedIn, where employers are, potential clients are. People look for everything under the sun on LinkedIn. Do you have any tips for doing that? 29 seconds.
Absolutely, Annette, I do. But one thing I want to jump in with, because you had said something really important that I want people to pay attention to, which is, hey, Brenden, I still remember the 2 to 3 people in the last few years who had sent me a video message. That's how rare it is. So even if you send the most terrible video message to Annette, she will remember you because the list is so small. And this ties into a principle that people can write down on a piece of paper as they're listening to this, Annette. And it's the following. If you communicate 20% better than your industry, you will stand out 100% of the time. So it's not about doing the big things. Oh, do I need to get on a TED stage? Do I need to jump up and down and do backflips? Like, no. 20% better will help you stand out all the time. So if most people don't even have a profile video. If you just do the thing, you're already ahead of 95% of people listening to this podcast, without a doubt. So now, how did I structure my profile video? Very simple. What's great about video is you have unlimited attempts. So what did I do? I'm a bit different because I produced mine professionally. But
Mhm.
basically, the strategy is you take a piece of paper and you write out the whole 29 seconds word for word because the video is really short, and you just practice it with the voice recorder until it's perfect. Then you shoot your video. That's it. Simple.
Yeah. I'm a fan. I actually learned to do video by doing sort of a couple of lines at a time. So I guess with the 29 seconds, you're only going to have a few lines. But I have found that has helped me doing, maybe a 3-minute video or something, that it's easier if I can just do a couple of sentences, stop, record a couple more sentences. And that way also, if you make a mistake, you don't have to do the whole thing over again.
Absolutely. It's a multiplier effect to your point. As we do one thing, everything else becomes easier. Example, if we get better at presenting, we'll naturally get better at conversations. If we do the random word exercise, love that, sir, right? You only received one. Well, if we do the random word exercise, then what happens? We get really comfortable at small talk because small talk is uncertainty. You don't know what's going to come up in a conversation. But if you master that, I mean, everything else becomes easier. Absolutely.
Oh no, I agree with you completely. And and hi to our my friend Sarah. We're happy to have you here. And yes, she's only received one video message, and it has not been from me, sadly. So, but I will say that I do feel comfortable talking to anyone. I mean, I'm in the grocery store, I'm talking to people in line, and much to my husband's embarrassment, I just talk to strangers all the time. But I credit being a bartender for years, where I had to make small talk with people that really broke me of that. So for people who aren't bartenders, and don't have to, talk to people as part of their job, what are some ways that they can become more comfortable just talking to strangers like that?
Absolutely, Annette. So for me, I would start with step number one, besides the random word exercise, which is, in my opinion, a strategy I teach called the value list. So here's the problem most of us make with relationship building in general, Lynette, is we try and get everyone to like us. Oh my God, if I go to this grocery store, if I go to this pancake shop, if I go to this restaurant, I hope everybody loves me. And the message that I want to send to everyone listening to this, Annette, is you don't get to talk to a lot of people in your life. Because if you think about it, let's say you meet somebody new every few days,
Hmm.
let's say every 3 days. You'll only meet 100 people a year. And that's already a lot for most people. And
Yeah.
then if you live 50 more years, let's say we're both 30 years old, we live until 80, that's only 5,000 people. So the question now becomes, who do we want those 5,000 people to be out of a sea of billions? So now, how do we do that? We don't need to go to a grocery store and talk to strangers. Instead, what we need to do is make a list of the 5 most generous people in our network. These are people that we already know who are just
Mhm.
amazing. Tina's amazing. She's a great example,
Yeah, she is
right?
fabulous.
Right. And all we have to do is add value to our top 5, like Tina, and she'll just introduce us to the best people in her network. And that's the most efficient way to network.
That's how I met you, through Tina.
Absolutely.
And
There you go.
it is so true. It is so true. And and I love that. It's kind of like doing in-person communication, kind of what people do on LinkedIn, where they're just, engaging with the people that they know, and that's how they meet other people in their feed. So I would be remiss if I did not ask you for a few things beyond the exercises that someone can do to become a better communicator. And I'm thinking about people that are, say, they're on a sales call with a potential client, or they're meeting with their boss because they're trying to get a raise or something like that. What are some tips that you can give people just for that one-on-one kind of?
For sure, Annette. Love that. So I would say for the sales call, that's really easy to talk about, which is simply this. Have you done the question drill 100 times? That's the easiest way to get really good on sales calls because you're always selling the same product. And then after the question drill, what happens is you want to rewatch yourself doing sales calls and change your tonality and get feedback on how to do better. One
Oh.
other tip as well that works really, really well that I teach clients is whenever they go into a sales call, they should watch their best sales call, like closing of the sale, so that it reinvigorates them. It's like, yeah, like I know how to close. I believe in my product. I'm the best. So they go into that call, they have that energy, even if they got rejected the last call. So that's the advice for that specifically.
No, I love that. I'm going to try that myself. That's really really great advice. But something else that I think about is, and you have done that in our conversation today, injecting humor into your conversation, your answers. Is that something that you do, that you've learned from doing, talking about all the different topics all the time, and you find ways to work stuff in like that? Because it's
Right
so
in it.
natural. It sounds like you're just doing it off the cuff, and I'm guessing you're not.
I'm not actually. So sometimes I do. But what I would say is humor is a tool like any other. So I'd say the first thing for those of you who are listening, do you want to be funny? Like, are you a funny person? Is that something you desire? And if not, totally fine. There's a lot of people who are really good at communication who are not that funny and nobody cares. Right? So I'll give you an example. Like Seth Godin ain't that funny. Like
That's true.
you might say one or two jokes. Yet, like I admire him. He's one of the best speakers in the world, in my opinion. So I don't think it's necessarily about humor. But for those of you who are interested, I will tell you a secret about how the best comedians are funny. And the secret is, right? I look at you. The secret is most of their jokes aren't funny, but they don't make it show. So, for example, let's say we're a stand up comedian, Annette, and I say 20 jokes, but 15 of them are not funny, but I don't make it show. But the other five, people blast out laughing. They'll leave thinking that I'm really funny, even if in my head I go, shit, like my 15 other jokes didn't land, but nobody else knows. So that's really the key. The other piece as well is the repeatable joke. So I actually say the same exact joke every time I'm on a podcast in it. And the joke was around the question drill, where I talk about 3 years ago when I was nervous. Somebody asked me, hey, where does the fear of communication come from? I go, I don't know, Los Angeles. That always gets laughs. That's why I always say that joke over and over and over again in every podcast, and it works.
Wow. So Sarah says she's funny. I know Sarah. She is pretty funny. I like to think of I like to think of myself as being funny also. But I think it seems like it's more about something that's maybe a little bit off kilter and unexpected than humorous.
Right. So there's like two different types of humor, right? So the one that's prepared and the one's unprepared. So for those of you who are taking that journey to be funny, I would start with prepared laughter first to get yourself comfortable. And then when you start building momentum, then you could try and risk a couple of jokes and see what happens.
Wow. So now I have to, since you are a public speaker coach, what are some tips for someone, who wants to do more public speaking, maybe has their eye or, on doing a TEDx talk or something like that? What's some advice that you would give to them?
If you're not willing to do the same presentation 100 times, it's probably not worth doing at all. I think what all of the best communicators on the planet share in common is their willingness to be singularly focused on one topic and one presentation. Let's use the best example in the world, Tony Robbins. He's been doing the same workshops, Unleash the Power Within, Date with Destiny, Business Mastery, for 40 years. It's always the same thing, over and over and over again.
Wow. Really?
Yeah, it's literally the same presentation, and I've watched it like 5 times because I love it so
Wow.
much. But that's the point I want to drive. Nobody cares. They want it to be the same thing. We don't want Tony Robbins to come up to us and say, "Let's do something different. Let's talk about porcupines." No, Tony, I don't want to talk about porcupines. I'm paying you like $5,000, $3,000, $10,000 to talk about the same thing that you talk about everyone else, and that's what most people aren't willing to do. In it, even my free training, like that you came to, it's the same workshop every time. It's been like 75 times doing the same workshop, but that's why it's so good because the same workshop over and over again.
No, I love that. And I have listened to that Unleash the Power Within. I had the tapes years ago when I was in sales and I was listening to them. And he is a very inspiring speaker. I mean, he's very energetic and powerful. But it's interesting what you say. And I had read something a few years ago. And I'm pretty sure it was about Steve Martin. And he was speaking, and you would, go to see him speak on stage. And when people went, they were wanting to hear things about, tidbits from him, about people he worked with and being an actor. And he was talking about something completely different. I forget what it was, maybe about how he became a writer or something like that. And people just didn't want to hear it. They went there. And so how do we get people, and I'm curious for myself, to expect a certain something from us?
Absolutely, Annette. So there's three parts to this, which is my definition of communication, which I'm happy to share. Which is
Okay.
how do we convey an idea that helps us achieve a specific outcome for a specific audience? How do we convey an idea in a way that achieves a specific outcome for a specific audience? And that could be wide. That could be a sales presentation. That could be convincing our significant other that we should have Chinese food, not Mexican food. I define that as communication too, and public speaking, because we're trying to help somebody achieve that. So now there's three parts to that definition. How do we get someone to listen to our ideas? How do we get someone to take action on our ideas? And the third one, which is the holy grail of mastery, how do we get people to share our ideas? So if somebody's listening to you, does the thing, does the random word exercise. That's why I'm not overwhelming people with information. I'm really focused. Are you doing the random word? Are we booking 50 minutes on our calendar? So are they taking action on it? And then more importantly, hey, this is so good. I want to share this with everyone else. In the same way Tina shared the random word exercise with you.
Yes.
That's the goal. So then within that piece, how do we move throughout the ladder? What could Steve have done better? Ask your audience. Hey, did you actually take action on ideas? No, Steve, I don't care. Why? Because I wanted this, I wanted that. And that helps Steve change his presentation.
Wow. Wow. I'm so excited that you came here, and you are so full of information, and we've talked about a lot of different sort of communication topics. But I'm always want to ask people, sort of, we're nearing the end, what is something that you think is important to share that I haven't asked you and we have not discussed?
For sure, and that's a great question. You know what I would say is the energy that we have around communication. The biggest pet peeve I have about this industry is it's so negative. We always start every conversation with the eulogy and Jerry Seinfeld's death quote. I was like, Jerry, you got to change your work, man. Like, that's not helping people. Versus going, wait a second, communication affects every area of our life. It's the way that we raise our children. It's the way that we talk to our family. It's the way that we make more money. It's the way that we make new friends. It's about leading a more fulfilling life. So I do encourage your audience and the people listening to this to be excited about their communication through this question. How would your life change if you were an exceptional communicator? So many of us dream about our vacations, the expensive houses, the conferences, the traveling destinations we want to go to, but we've never dreamt even once in our life about a world in which we're a better communicator in it. And I would encourage your people to start that conversation today.
Well, I thank you so much for that, and I know that you do the your free introductory communication. What's it called? It's on your LinkedIn profile, right? It's available all the time, or regularly.
Absolutely not. So happy to talk about this. So there's two ways to keep in touch. The first one is rockstarcommunicator.com, or you go to my
Okay.
LinkedIn bio and sign up for the free training. And then there's the YouTube channel as well, which is MasterTalk in one word.
Yeah, I have to explore more of your YouTube channel, but I really do appreciate the time that you've spent here with me today. And I am going to be going back and rewatching this myself, because you dropped a lot of gems, and we've had a lot of people applauding on the side as I've been watching. So thank you so much for your time, for being here, and everyone who's been here for us during the program and will be listening on the replay, and also later on my podcast. So I will say thank you so much again. And to everyone out there, have a great rest of your day.